And we're proud to have her with us tonight, Melody Musgrove.
Well, good evening. What a great pleasure it is for me to be here with you this evening. Ari, thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be with you. You know, when I first began at OSEP, I'm in my 5th year now as OSEP director. It's kind of hard to believe that. My how time flies, but when you're either really busy or having a great time, or both. So when I first started at OSEP, someone asked me a great question. They said, if you just had a magic wand and you could wave it and special education would be what you want it to be, what would that look like? And I've thought about that question an awful lot, and my answer is still the same. If I could wave a wand, special ed would look like where every parent could send their child to school every day and know they would get what they need without an IEP. It's really a shame that that's what we have to have to make people do the right thing, and sometimes that's still not enough. But that's not the world we live in. And if we didn't have to have an IEP, there wouldn't be an OSEP, and I wouldn't have a job. So there we go. You know, when almost 40 years ago now, Public Law 94-142 was passed, and think about how far indeed we've come and how far we have yet to go. But back then there were millions of children prohibited from attending school simply because they had a disability. And so then this came along and we said, wow, you can't deny children in education because they have a disability. But what we did say, there was this provision in there called least restrictive environment, and rather than begin with the assumption that all children are general ed first, we basically said you have to let them in school, but you still have an out to segregate them. And we're still paying the price for those decisions that we made then. I'm so glad we have IDEA, but our system of special education was based on a medical model, which is diagnose the problem and then prescribe something to treat it. And that's caused us to focus on what kids can do, rather than on what strengths people bring to the table and how do we capitalize on those strengths. And like I said, we are still trying to break down some of the barriers that we built in the very beginning, and we still have a long way to go in trying to change that. As you know, there's a lot going on in the space of education. We have new standards and assessments and teacher evaluation and ESEA waivers, and I know those are really scintillating topics. But one of the things that is really at the top of my agenda is changing the accountability system so that we are really focused on improving the educational results for children with disabilities, transforming our work so that, as the Secretary of Education said, OSEP is more focused on being an engine of innovation rather than a compliance-driven bureaucracy. An engine of innovation that drives better outcomes for children and their families. We hear a lot of talk about change these days, right? There's changes in the economy, and healthcare, and state governments, and Congress, and so on. Change is everywhere. And it takes place in multiple directions. And change can move us forward, but it can also move us backward. And we don't just need change for the sake of change. That's not why I want to move to a results-driven accountability system. I want change that is progress. Again, that it's not enough for children to get a compliant IEP or to meet the procedural requirements of IDEA. It's not enough if children aren't learning. It's important, but that's just not enough. We need progress that enables us to empower individuals to live the lives that they choose. When the majority of adults with disabilities in this country are unemployed, that's just unacceptable. We have a great nation. We can do better, and we must do better. And the path toward employment begins in school. And we have to do a better job of preparing students for the post-secondary lives that they will face, whether it's in additional education or for employment. Almost 40 years ago now, when IDEA was passed, again, it was to ensure that children with disabilities have access to education, and to that extent, it's been very successful. Children are no longer prohibited from attending school because of having a disability. But IDEA has not fulfilled our expectations for improving the educational results for children with disabilities. When IDEA was reauthorized in 2004, Congress sent such a clear message to our nation with the language that they put in the preamble to IDEA. And I revisit this language so often because it's profound. That improving educational results for students with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, economic self-sufficiency, and independent living for individuals with disabilities. That's the preamble to IDEA. That's what should set the stage, should be the foundation for the work that we do in special education. Because what we focus on is what improves, right? What gets our attention is where we get better. OSEP has been sharply focused on improving compliance, and compliance has improved. If you look at our compliance measures across the nation, we are at very high levels of compliance in terms of meeting timelines and due process and things like that. But we have not seen an appreciable or an equivalent increase in the academic outcomes for students with disabilities. If we want better results, then we've got to be focused on the things that are going to lead us to better results. We all know there'll never be enough money, enough time, enough people to do everything that needs to be done. So we have to prioritize. That means we've got to be focused on the things that are going to get us to better results that will enable students with disabilities to go on and access the American dream. Does it mean that compliance isn't important? Of course not. Compliance is important. Protecting the rights of children and their families is very important. But it does mean that we will consider compliance through the lens of student results. Because IDEA says that our monitoring should be focused on the things that lead to better outcomes for students with disabilities. We're shifting our view of how we see effectiveness in special education from are we meeting the procedural requirements to the law to are students learning and being prepared for the future. So when we say a state meets requirements, what should that tell us? And for the first time this year, we used student outcomes in making those state determinations, whether they meet requirements, need assistance, need intervention, and so forth. In the past, they were completely disconnected from student outcomes. We could say that a state met requirements, and they would meet procedural requirements that have really poor outcomes in reading and math and graduation rates for students with disabilities. It didn't tell us very much about how we were performing. So how do we recognize states that are really being innovative, that are being aggressive, and have the courage to raise expectations for students with disabilities, and do the thing, have the kind of training and the kinds of supports in place that teachers need, that students need, to raise expectations? Because we know that when students are held to high expectations, when they are receiving the kinds of supports and services they need beside their typical peers and are accessing the general curriculum, we know that they will succeed. All the research tells us that students with disabilities, when properly supported and when they have access to the general curriculum, they will achieve. They will meet the grade level standard because we know they can do it. But we still do have a long way to go. The outcomes in this country are so poor. Nationally, about 10% of kids with disabilities are proficient in reading. We have so far to go in that. We are not as inclusive as we need to be. Yesterday when I was at AUCD, I was on a panel and we talked a little bit about inclusiveness. And it just drives me nuts to go into schools and hear someone say, let me show you our inclusion program, or we're doing inclusion. Okay, you can't do inclusion. I mean, there is no, or let's show it even worse, let us show you our inclusion class. That's a good sign that's not inclusion. Because inclusion is a culture, right? I mean, it's a way of life, a way of thinking, a way of working. And not all schools are as inclusive as they need to be, and we've got to do better on that. Children with disabilities should be, as long as we're going to have IEPs, maybe one day in that dream that I have, we won't need them, but for now we do. And so children with disabilities should be participating in their IEPs from the youngest age, learning to self-advocate, learning to express what they need and what they want. It's their lives. And so they need to be able to, and they should be going at a very early age. Most places, from what I see, if kids are teenagers before they're even invited to their own IEP meetings, that's too late. they need to be learning that process and learning how to contribute and express what they want and need earlier. Ari mentioned discipline. We have such a long way to go in the fact that children with disabilities are disproportionately subjected to extreme disciplinary practices that exclude them from the classroom. The very ones who are the most vulnerable and need it the most are the ones who are removed from our classrooms. Yet there's no evidence that suspending a kid from school improves their behavior, improves the school climate, does anything to make the school any safer, but yet those practices still exist. But now at least we have the data collection that shows us how pervasive it is, and hopefully we can take steps now to address that, because there's so many better things that we can be doing. I mean, we know the things that work, right? I mean, we know that PBIS is effective. How about restorative justice practices? I mean, there's so many positive things that we could be doing that don't hurt kids. But yet you see in the data the prevalence of suspension and expulsion and restraint and seclusion. I really, really appreciate the relationship that I have with ASAN. I really do. I believe that it has enabled us to do some kind of cool things together. You bring things to our attention that matter. For instance, I think a couple of good examples, the bullying letter that we were able to issue was a direct result of an incoming letter that we received from Ari and from ASAN. The restraint and seclusion resource document I thought was very powerful. There are some things that we can do in the absence of new legislation. So I really appreciate the fact that we have this wonderful relationship, and I commit to continuing to be your partner, to work at this together, to work closely with you, to hear your concerns, to find ways that we can act together so that we can really build this more supportive, inclusive America that I think we all dream of. Like I said, I commit to continuing to be your partner. Let me know how I can be of assistance to you. It's great to see all of you tonight. Thank you for having me.